Okay, then let's move on. And next dimension of political institutions. Separation of government powers. And this aspect of constitutional design has to do with the degree of separation of powers between different branches of government. Okay, different branches. So as you may expect, we will primarily talk about the differences between presidential system and parliamentary system here. And we'll primarily pay our focus on democratic systems rather than authoritarianism and democracy. So first, in democratic presidential systems, the executive and the legislative branches are separately elected by the people. So there are two separate elections. You elect members of legislature and you elect the president. So, which conveys exactly the same information. People elect the legislature, people elect the president. And each branch is elected for a fixed term. So the number of that you serve is fixed. So in the US, presidents serve 4 years. Congresspersons serve 2 years. Senators serve 6 years. In Korea, presidents serve 4 years. No, 5 years. I said 4 and nobody. So pay attention. Maybe I was just checking on you guys. Yeah? So presidents serve 5 years and national congresspersons serve 4 years, right? So they have a fixed term and each has specific powers under the Constitution. So president and executive power, executive branch have a specific power to make certain decisions, and legislature has specific power to make certain decisions. Simply put, the legislative branch and executive branch are sort of separate in a presidential system. Now, moving on to the parliamentary system. The parliamentary system make the executive and legislative branches interdependent. Not independent, but interdependent. Okay? They depend on each other. And let's see what it means. Only the legislative branch is directly elected, whereas the cabinet or the executive branch emerges from the legislature. So only one type of election, legislative election. Cabinet is not elected. And let's see the picture. How's that? So people elect the members of the legislature. And the executive branch, headed by Prime Minister, emerges out of the legislature. So legislature selects the executive body. Okay? The cabinet is headed by Prime Minister, who selects the other cabinet members. So head of the government here is Prime Minister. Prime Minister selects other cabinet members, that is ministers, in other countries, or secretaries in the US, or in Korean, 장관. And there are other terms for the prime minister. Germans use the term federal chancellor. And also, some countries use the term called premier. So in previously communist countries, they commonly use the term premier. Okay. And typically, neither branch has a fixed term of office. Does that mean they serve forever? Answer is no. So we are going to find out what this means when I say neither branch has a fixed term. The cabinet can be voted out of office at any time. And most often, this is true of the legislature as well. Meaning that in a parliamentary system, politicians do not have job security, right? And the examples of the parliamentary system include Britain, Germany, and Japan, among many others. Maybe I have pictures. Basically, photos of parliaments of Britain, Germany, and Japan. Since we are discussing parliamentary system. How about Korea? Right now, we already saw that the Korean flag, right? So right now we do have presidential system. Yes, what we call the Second Republic, right? 제2공화국. Right after the April 19th student movement, up until May coup d'etat by Park Chung-hee. So we had the parliamentary system of government for about 10 months, headed by someone called 장면. So we really don't have a long history of parliamentary system. So we really didn't have a chance to see if that sort of system would work well in Korea or not. Now, in a parliamentary system, the prime minister and his or her cabinet must at all times enjoy the confidence of the parliamentary majority. Now, if you think about it, they came to power presumably because they had majority support in the parliament, right? So in a parliamentary system, usually you do need the support of the majority in the parliament to form a government or to form an executive branch or cabinet. So when they started out, presumably, you had the majority support or you had the confidence of the majority. And as long as you are in power, you have to maintain that confidence. Okay? But whenever the parliamentary majority, for whatever reason, expresses its lack of confidence through a no confidence vote, then the prime minister and all the other cabinet members must resign. Okay? So you started out with the confidence of the majority, but in the middle of your reign, if the majority said we are no longer confident in you and your group and your cabinet, you all have to resign. Okay? No confidence motions are typically introduced by the parliamentary opposition in the hope of bringing down the prime minister and the cabinet. Well, the main goal of political parties is to, well, get into power, right? So opposition parties have incentive to bring down the current government so they become the governing party. So whenever they have a chance, they try to introduce no confidence motion. If it carries, meaning if it gets support of the majority of the members of parliament, then current government collapses. And opposition has a chance to become the governing party. Therefore, usually no confidence motions are introduced by the opposition. Now, on the other hand, the prime minister typically has the power to dissolve the parliament and call new elections at any time. So the parliament has the power to introduce no confidence motion. On the executive side, prime minister has power to dissolve the parliament and call for a new election. So if the situation is right, the parliament can destroy the cabinet, or the prime minister can destroy the parliament. Destroy is a very strong term, right? Dissolve the parliament. And that's the reason why I said earlier that typically neither has fixed terms, because you don't know, if you are on the parliamentary side, you don't know when you are going to be dissolved. If you are on the executive side, you don't know when no confidence motion will be brought in, right? So you are not guaranteed of fixed amount of time in a parliamentary system. When you hear it, you may feel like parliamentary system should be very unstable because they are trying to kill each other all the time. But it is not the case. Parliamentary democracies do not experience the divided government that is common under presidentialism, when the party that controls the presidency does not control the legislature or vice versa. Now, in a parliamentary system, since prime minister can dissolve the parliament and parliament can pass the no confidence motion, now our first gut reaction is the system should be very unstable. However, looking at the presidential system, since the president and members of legislature are separately elected, it is very possible for the president coming from a party A, hypothetically, but the legislature is controlled by party B. Then the president and legislature would not agree all the time, right? And there may be a gridlock. Say in the US, right now Barack Obama is what? A Democrat. But the House of Representatives, the lower house, is controlled by the Republicans. And Well, for a bill to become a law, for an important policy to be implemented, oftentimes you need approval of both branches. For a bill to become a law, eventually, well, the process may start in the legislature, but eventually, who has to sign it in a presidential system? The president has to sign it, right? For a money matter, such as budget, president might have certain idea and push for something, but it's usually the House, the lower house of the Congress, who has power to give money or not. Okay? So again, there's a room for disagreement there. So in a presidential system, if the government is divided, meaning that the president and the majority of the legislature come from different parties, there's a lot of room for disagreement, conflict, and gridlock. How about Korea right now? Do we have a divided government? Probably not, right? The 새누리당 has the president, and 새누리당 also have close to, does it have a majority or close to it? I have a feeling that even if it does not have one today, it will by the end of 24th, April 24th. You guys are not paying attention. What's happening on 24th? 보궐선거, right? And and they will probably win in Busan and also in Chungcheongdo, right? And they will probably, how many seats does 새누리당 have right now? I think they started out as with 152, and then they kicked out 2, right? The appraisalism guy and the famous athlete, right? Anyway, they are around majority now, and they will definitely have majority by the end of 24th of April, I think. So we do not have a divided government. Well, that does not mean that it has always been the case, right? The famous case of divided government in Korea was, going back to the days of Notae, when the Democratic Justice Party, 민정당, had fewer than half of the seats in the National Assembly. Nothing was moving, and there was 3 large opposition parties. What was Notae's way of solving the problem of divided government? 삼당합당, right? 3-party merger. And by merging with Kim Il-sung's party and Kim Jong-pil's party, Notae was able to actually forge a majority party, right? Anyway, so in a parliamentary system, this type of divided government is always possible. So again, in a presidential system. In a presidential system, this type of divided system is always possible, and therefore room for conflict, no compromise, and gridlock. Now, my original explanation started out with the potential conflict in the parliamentary system, because Prime Minister can dissolve the Parliament, and Parliament can pass a no confidence motion. Then I turned around and told you guys that No, in a presidential system, there's other types of danger for the conflict, namely divided government. Then let's compare the two. Now, in a parliamentary system, the executive branch or cabinet becomes the agent of parliamentary majority, and in most parliamentary systems consists largely of members of the parliament. So only because Prime Minister has power to dissolve the parliament and parliament has the power to pass the no confidence motion, that does not mean that they always have incentive to destroy each other, right? If you think about it, in the figure that you saw about 5 minutes ago, the executive or cabinet emerges out of the parliament, right? Emerges out of the majority in the parliament. So majority party members become cabinet members, right? So if you are leaders of the majority party or majority coalition, you have a good chance to become one of the ministers, 장관. Okay? Then parliamentary majority and the cabinet belong to the same side. 우리 편. Okay? Therefore, although there is such a mechanism called dissolution of parliament and no confidence motion, in the real world, you really don't have much incentive to dissolve the parliament, which is 우리 편, right? And you really don't have much incentive to pass no confidence motion if the cabinet is controlled by our own party, right? So indeed, the conflicts between parliament and executive are less likely to occur, and decision making tends to be much more efficient than under presidentialism. So comparing parliamentarism and presidentialism, the probability of conflict is much less in a parliamentary system than presidential system. Since the same party or parties controls both branches of government, so the majority party controls the parliament and the cabinet. The cabinet tends to dominate policy making, and the legislature is typically less influential than under a presidential system. So, in a parliamentary system, the same party controls both the parliament and the executive branch, the cabinet. Who becomes the members of the cabinet? Usually the important members of the majority party in the parliament. The leaders become the cabinet members. So for most important decisions, when these leaders make the decision, usually other members of parliament just follow. They rarely object. So there's a sort of a harmony. And in that sense, the parliament in a parliamentary system is not that important. Cabinet is more important because leaders make decisions, which is clearly an irony if we just stick to the names. Because in a parliamentary system, you would feel like parliament should be strong. But comparing the parliaments in the parliamentary system and presidential system, usually the parliament in the presidential system is stronger than the parliament in the parliamentary system. Okay? So that's an irony in the name. And you may remember my feelings about multiple choice questions and the way how you've been educated and you have been forced to choose one correct answer. But even in a political world like this, we cannot say that there are only two choices. And you got to choose parliamentary system or presidential system. And even in the same parliamentary system, there are varieties of differences. Okay? Same is the case with presidential system. Well, that does not necessarily mean that I'm not going to give you a multiple choice question later on, but anyway, that's my feeling. Well, why do I say that? Not all democracies fit neatly into either presidential system or parliamentary system. Okay? There are other things in between, and we call them hybrid system. Nowadays, the term hybrid is a very common term, right? Half gasoline and half electricity, right? Or mixed system. Or some people call this semi-presidential system. And in Korean, we call it 이원 집정도제, right?